Adrian Mercer hadn't even turned off the bedside lamp when his phone lit up at 10:03 a.m. Groggy, shirtless, alone in his Manhattan penthouse. He squinted at the screen. Asha. He froze. He hadn't seen her in months. Not since she walked out with that look in her eyes, the one that said he'd already lost something he didn't understand yet. He answered, "Adrian." No greeting, no pause. "I'm at the hospital. She's in labor." His breath caught. "Whose labor?" "Mine," she said. "And it's your baby." The room tilted. "They're rushing me into surgery," she whispered. "If something happens, you need to come now." The line went dead before he could even process what she'd just said. Adrian stared at the black screen like it might explain itself. His baby. Asha was having his baby, right now, and he had no idea she was even still pregnant. 7 months. 7 months since their last conversation ended with a slammed door, and words neither of them could take back. 7 months since he'd accused her of something so dark, so unforgivable, that she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. And now she was calling him from a hospital bed, alone, scared, and about to give birth to a child he didn't know existed. The guilt hit him like a freight train. He bolted upright, his chest tight, his mind racing through 1,000 questions he didn't have time to answer. What hospital? How far along was she? Why didn't she tell him? But the only question that mattered was the one screaming in his head. What kind of man lets this happen? Adrian threw on the first clothes he could find. Jeans, a wrinkled button-down, sneakers without socks. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie the laces. He grabbed his wallet, his keys and his phone, dialing her back as he stumbled toward the elevator. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. His stomach dropped. He tried again. Nothing. The elevator doors slid open, and he stepped inside, staring at his reflection in the polished steel walls. Dark circles under his eyes. Hair a mess. He looked like a man who'd been running from something for months, because he had been. Running from the memory of that night. Running from the shame of what he'd said to her. Running from the terrifying possibility that he'd destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. But there was something else now, something he couldn't run from anymore. Fatherhood. It was barreling toward him whether he was ready or not, and the clock was ticking. He burst out onto the street and flagged down the first cab he saw. "Mount Sinai," he barked, sliding into the back seat. "West Side. Fast." The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, saw the panic in his eyes, and hit the gas. Manhattan blurred past the window. Storefronts, pedestrians, food trucks, the chaos of midday traffic. But Adrian wasn't seeing any of it. His mind was somewhere else. Somewhere softer. Somewhere that hurt. He remembered the first time he saw Asha. It was at a charity gala 2 years ago, one of those black tie events where everyone wore fake smiles and expensive watches. He'd been bored out of his mind until she walked in. She wasn't like the others. She didn't glide through the room with rehearsed charm. She moved with purpose, with warmth, with a kind of confidence that didn't need approval. She wore a deep red dress that stood out against the sea of blacks and whites, and when she laughed, God, when she laughed, the whole room seemed to lean in just to hear it. He'd introduced himself, fumbling through small talk, and she'd smiled at him like she could see right through the CEO act. "You don't really want to be here, do you?" she'd said. He'd laughed. That obvious? Only to people who feel the same way. And just like that, they were inseparable. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. He was Wall Street. She was Sunday soul food dinners in Harlem, with her family, gospel choirs, and late-night poetry readings in Brooklyn cafes. He wore tailored suits and closed deals over scotch. She wore vintage denim and believed in community over capital. But somehow, it worked. She softened his edges. He gave her space to dream bigger. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They took long walks through Central Park at sunset, shared coffee at dawn. Before his morning meetings, stayed up late debating politics and purpose. She made him feel like more than his net worth. And he made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. For the first time in his life, Adrian wasn't running toward success. He was running toward her. But then everything changed. She told him she was pregnant, and instead of joy, he felt terror. Instead of celebration, he felt trapped. His mind spiraled into every worst-case scenario his privileged upbringing had taught him to fear. And when she mentioned going to see a doctor, he jumped to the darkest conclusion. "You're going to end it, aren't you?" he'd said, his voice cold and accusatory. The look on her face still haunted him. Shock, hurt, betrayal. "Adrian, no, I would never. Don't lie to me, Asher." She tried to explain, tried to tell him it was just a routine checkup. But he wouldn't listen. He was too scared, too angry, too wrapped up in his own panic to hear her. So he said the words that shattered everything. "We're done." And she'd walked out, just like that. No screaming, no pleading, just that look in her eyes, the one that said he'd already lost her. The cab screeched to a halt outside Mount Sinai Hospital. Adrian tossed 220s at the driver and ran. His heart pounded in his chest as he burst through the automatic doors into the fluorescent glare of the emergency room. Nurses, patients, the smell of antiseptic and fear. He sprinted to the front desk, barely able to form the words. Asher Johnson. She's in labor. Where is she?" The receptionist typed slowly, agonizingly slowly. Adrian's fists clenched. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "Maternity wing, 4th floor." "But sir, visiting hours." He was already running, because the question that mattered now wasn't whether he deserved a second chance. It was whether he'd get there in time to even ask for one. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and Adrian ran like his life depended on it, because maybe it did. Maybe everything that mattered, everything he'd thrown away 7 months ago, was somewhere down that sterile white hallway, and if he didn't move fast enough, he'd lose it all over again. His sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum as he rounded the corner, nearly colliding with a nurse pushing a medication cart. "Sorry," he gasped, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The maternity wing stretched before him like a maze of identical doors, each one hiding someone's miracle, someone's tragedy, someone's second chance. Which one was hers? He skidded to a stop at the nurse's station, breathless, wild-eyed, probably looking like a man who'd just outrun his own demons. "Asher Johnson," he panted. "She was just admitted. Emergency. Please, I need to know where she is." The nurse behind the desk looked up slowly, her expression trained in that particular brand of hospital calm that either soothes panic or ignites it. She studied him for a moment, disheveled hair, wrinkled shirt, the desperation bleeding through every word. "Are you family?" Adrian's mouth went dry. Family. Was he? He'd walked away. He'd accused her of the unthinkable. He'd left her to face this alone for 7 long months. What right did he have to claim that word now? But before he could answer, before he could stumble through an explanation that might get him turned away, a voice cut through the chaos. "He's the father." Adrian spun around. A woman in scrubs stood in the doorway of one of the rooms, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel small. She was older, maybe mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. There was something about her expression, protective, assessing, like she was deciding in real time whether he deserved to be here. "Room 412, she said, jerking her head toward the door behind her. "But if you're going in there, you better be ready to show up, really show up, because that girl has been through enough." The words hit him like a slap. That girl has been through enough. Of course she had. While he'd been sleeping in his penthouse, closing deals, pretending the past didn't exist, Asher had been carrying their child. Alone. Going to appointments alone. Feeling the first kicks alone. Waking up scared in the middle of the night alone. And now she was about to bring their baby into the world. Possibly 2. Early, possibly in danger, and she'd had to be the one to call him. She'd had to swallow her pride, her hurt, her every reason to hate him, just to give him the chance to be here. How many men get a second chance like this? How many men get to walk back through a door they slammed shut themselves? Adrian nodded, unable to form words, and moved toward room 412. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. What would he say? What could he possibly say that would make any of this okay? But there was no more time for rehearsal. He pushed the door open. The room was smaller than he expected, dimly lit except for the glow of medical monitors that beeped steadily in the corner. And there, in the hospital bed, propped up against white pillows, was Asha. Even now, even pale and exhausted and hooked up to an 4, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands falling loose around her face. Her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at him with so much love, were closed, her breathing measured but strained. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, protective even in rest. Adrian's chest tightened. 7 months. She was 7 months pregnant. The baby was coming too early, way too early. He'd read enough, heard enough horror stories about premature births to know that 28 weeks was a coin flip. Modern medicine could work miracles, sure, but it was still a fight, still a risk, and it was his fault she was fighting it alone. He took a step closer, then another, moving as quietly as he could, like he might shatter something fragile if he made too much noise. But hospitals have a way of betraying you, the squeak of his shoe, the rustle of his jacket, and Asha's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other across the small room, across 7 months of silence, across all the words that had been said and all the words that hadn't. Her expression was unreadable, not angry, not relieved, just tired, so incredibly tired. "You came," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian felt his throat close up. "Of course, I came. I wasn't sure you would." The honesty in those words gutted him. She wasn't sure. After everything they'd been, after the love they'd shared, she wasn't sure he'd show up for the birth of his own child. What did that say about him? What did that say about the man he'd become? He moved to her bedside, slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. "Asha, don't." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Not yet. I don't have the energy for that conversation right now." She gestured to the monitors, to the 4 in her arm, to the reality of the situation. "Right now, I just need you to be here. Can you do that?" Adrian nodded, blinking back the burn in his eyes. "I can do that." He pulled up the chair beside her bed and sat down, close enough to reach for her hand but not presuming to take it. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if that's what she needed. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with everything unsaid, but it wasn't hostile. It was just present, real, the kind of silence that exists between two people who once knew each other's heartbeats. A contraction hit her then, sudden and vicious. Adrian watched her face contort, watched her grip the bed rail so hard her knuckles went white. The monitor beside her bed spiked, tracking the intensity, and Adrian felt helpless in a way he'd never experienced before. In boardrooms, he controlled outcomes. In negotiations, he found solutions. But here? Here, he could do nothing but watch the woman he'd hurt suffer through something he'd helped create. "Breathe," he found himself saying, leaning forward. "Just breathe through it." She shot him a look, half pain, half irritation, and he realized how stupid that sounded. As if she didn't know to breathe. As if she hadn't been doing this for hours before he even got here. But then her hand shot out and grabbed his, squeezing so hard he thought his bones might crack, and he didn't care. He squeezed back, anchoring her, letting her pour all that pain into him, because it was the least he could do. The contraction passed. She released his hand, gasping, and fell back against the pillows. "They're getting closer," she said, her voice shaky. "The doctor said, they're going to have to do an emergency C-section if things don't progress soon. The baby's heart rate keeps dropping." Adrian's blood ran cold. Dropping? He's under stress. They don't know why, but they're monitoring it. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the fear she'd been holding back. "Adrian, what if something goes wrong? What if—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," he said, with a conviction he didn't feel but needed to give her anyway. "You're strong. The baby's strong. And these doctors? They're the best in the city. They're going to take care of both of you. She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But belief is a fragile thing when you're lying in a hospital bed at 28 weeks, feeling your body betray the timeline it's supposed to follow. The door opened, and a doctor walked in, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of competence that immediately steadied the room. She glanced at Adrian, then at Asha, and offered a small smile. "I'm Dr. Patel," she said, moving to check the monitors. "I'm going to examine you now, Asha, and we'll see where we're at." Adrian started to stand to give them privacy, but Asha's hand shot out again, grabbing his wrist. "Stay," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a lifeline. So he stayed. He stayed while Dr. Patel examined her, while the numbers on the monitors shifted and beeped, while Asha's breathing grew more labored. He stayed because 7 months ago he'd left, and that was the biggest mistake of his life. Dr. Patel straightened up, her expression measured. "You're at 6 centimeters, she said. "We're going to give it another hour, but if we don't see more progress, or if the baby's heart rate drops again, we're going to prep you for surgery. Okay?" Asha nodded, but Adrian could see the panic rising in her chest. Surgery, C-section, emergency. All words that meant danger, risk, the possibility that things could go terribly wrong. Dr. Patel left, and the room fell into that heavy silence again. Adrian could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of every choice he'd made that led to this moment. "I should have been here," he said quietly. "I should have been with you this whole time." Asha didn't respond right away. She stared at the ceiling, her hand still resting on her belly, feeling the life inside her that was fighting to come out too soon. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she finally said, her voice so soft he had to lean in to hear it. It wasn't the morning sickness. It wasn't the exhaustion or the cravings or even the fear. It was walking into every appointment alone, sitting in that waiting room, watching couples hold hands, watching fathers press their ears to their wives' bellies to hear the heartbeat. And I'd sit there by myself and pretend it was fine, pretend I didn't need you there. Her voice cracked. "But I did, Adrian. I needed you. And you weren't there." The words carved into him, each one a precise incision that exposed the rot he'd been carrying. He'd known, abstractly, that he'd hurt her. But hearing it, hearing the loneliness, the abandonment, the way she'd had to armor herself against the world just to survive, made it real in a way his guilt couldn't capture. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry, Asha. I was scared. I was selfish. I thought—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought you were going to end the pregnancy, and I panicked. I couldn't see past my own fear. And instead of trusting you, instead of asking you what you actually meant, I assumed the worst. And I said things I can never take back." Asha turned her head to look at him, and there were tears streaming down her face now, silent and steady. "I was going to a routine checkup, Adrian. That's all it was. And you looked at me like I was a monster, like I was capable of something so horrible without even talking to you first." "I know." His own voice broke. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate that I made you feel that way. I hate that I wasn't there for the first ultrasound, for finding out it's a boy, for any of it. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Asha's whole body tensed. The monitor screamed, the numbers spiking, and Adrian's hand found hers again. She gripped it, her nails digging into his skin, and he let her. He'd let her break every bone in his hand if it helped. When it passed, she was gasping, sweat beading on her forehead. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Adrian said fiercely. "Look at me. You're the strongest person I know. You carried our baby for 7 months without me. You went to work. You took care of yourself. You did everything right. You can do this." She shook her head, tears spilling faster now. "But what if he doesn't make it? What if he's too small, too early? What if I'm not enough?" Adrian's heart shattered. Here she was, about to give birth under terrifying circumstances, and she was worried about not being enough. This woman who'd had every reason to give up, to be bitter, to shut him out completely, and she was still fighting, still hoping, still loving that baby with everything she had. "You are enough," he said, his voice raw. "You've always been enough. And our son? He's a fighter. He has to be, because he has you for a mother." She squeezed his hand, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. And maybe he was. Maybe that's what second chances look like. Not grand gestures or perfect apologies, but just showing up, holding on, and refusing to let go when everything falls apart. The hour crept by in a blur of contractions, monitoring and mounting tension. Every time the baby's heart rate dipped, Adrian felt his own heart stop. Every time Asher cried out in pain, he wished he could take it from her, carry it himself, but all he could do was be there, be present, be the man he should have been 7 months ago. Dr. Patel returned, her expression more serious now. "The baby's heart rate is becoming erratic," she said, moving to check the monitors. "We need to do the C-section now. We can't wait any longer." Asher's eyes went wide with fear. "Now? But—" "I know it's scary," Dr. Patel said gently, "but your baby's in distress. The safest thing for both of you is to get him out as quickly as possible." Nurses flooded into the room, moving with practiced efficiency. They unhooked monitors, prepped Asher for transport, rattled off medical jargon that Adrian couldn't follow. Everything was happening so fast. Too fast. One of the nurses turned to him. "You'll need to wait here. We'll come get you once she's in recovery." "No." Asher's voice cut through the chaos. "I want him with me." The nurse hesitated. "It's an emergency surgery. We don't usually—" "Please." Asher's eyes locked on Adrian's, desperate and determined. "I need him there." Dr. Patel glanced between them, then nodded. "Get him scrubbed in. Fast." And just like that, Adrian was being pulled into a whirlwind of preparation. Someone shoved scrubs at him, barking instructions to change quickly. Someone else handed him a surgical cap and mask. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie the strings, but he managed. Because Asher needed him. Because his son needed him. Because this was his chance to prove that he could be the man they both deserved. They wheeled Asher down the hall, and Adrian followed, his heart hammering in his chest. The operating room was blindingly bright, all steel and sterile instruments and people moving with urgent precision. They transferred Asher onto the operating table, and Adrian stood by. Her head, the only part of her he could see above the surgical drape. Her eyes found his, wide and terrified. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," he admitted, "because there was no point in pretending anymore. But we're doing this together, okay? You and me. Right here, right now." She nodded, tears sliding down her temples. He reached out and wiped them away with his thumb, wishing he could do more, wishing he could promise that everything would be okay. But some promises are too big to make. Some outcomes are beyond your control. All you can do is stand in the fear and refuse to let it win. Dr. Patel's voice cut through the tension. "We're starting now, Asher. You're going to feel some pressure, but no pain. Just focus on your breathing." Adrian watched Asher's face, watched her struggle to stay calm, to trust the process. He kept his hand on her shoulder, a constant presence, a silent promise that she wasn't alone anymore. The minutes stretched into eternity. Adrian couldn't see what was happening on the other side of the drape, but he could hear it. The murmur of the surgical team, the clink of instruments, the steady beep of monitors. And then, cutting through it all, a sound that stopped his heart. Silence. The baby should be crying. Shouldn't he be crying? Adrian's eyes shot to Asher's face, and he saw his own terror reflected there. "Why isn't he crying?" She gasped. "Why isn't—" And then, faint at first but growing stronger, a cry. Thin and reedy, but unmistakably there. The sound of life. The sound of a fighter. "It's a boy," Dr. Patel announced, and Adrian heard the smile in her voice. "He's small, but he's breathing." Asher sobbed, her whole body shaking with relief, and Adrian bent down, pressing his forehead to hers. "He's here." he whispered. "Our son is here." They brought the baby over, wrapped in a tiny blanket, his face scrunched and red. He was so small. Smaller than Adrian had imagined, smaller than seemed possible. His fingers were like matchsticks, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he adjusted to the world outside the womb. But his eyes, when they fluttered open for just a moment, were alert, aware, alive. "We need to get him to the NICU," one of the nurses said gently. "He's stable, but we need to monitor him closely." Adrian nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from his son. This tiny human who'd been fighting to survive before he was even born. This miracle wrapped in a blanket who'd just turned Adrian's entire world upside down. They whisked the baby away, and Adrian felt something inside him crack open. All the fear, all the guilt, all the love he'd been holding back for 7 months came pouring out. He looked down at Asha, who was crying openly now, her hands reaching for a baby who was no longer there. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's perfect. He's ours," Adrian said, and the weight of that word, ours, settled over him like a vow. Not just his, not just hers, theirs. A family, fragile and new and fighting, but together. They closed Asha up and wheeled her to recovery, and Adrian followed, numb, with exhaustion and exhilaration and a terror he couldn't quite name. Because the baby was alive, yes, but he was also in the NICU. He was still so small, still so vulnerable. There were so many things that could go wrong, so many battles left to fight. In the recovery room, Asha lay still, her eyes half closed, the anesthesia wearing off slowly. Adrian sat beside her, holding her hand, both of them too drained to speak but too wired to sleep. "They said we can see him soon," Adrian said quietly. "Once you're stable, they'll take us to the NICU." Asha nodded, her thumb brushing against his knuckles. "I'm glad you came," she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "I know I said I wasn't sure you would, but I'm glad you're here." Adrian lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "There's nowhere else I'd be," and he meant it, every word. Because in that hospital room, with his son fighting for his life 1 floor away, and the woman he loved lying exhausted beside him, Adrian understood something he'd been too afraid to see before. Success didn't mean anything if you had no one to share it with. Wealth didn't matter if you spent it alone. And second chances, they weren't given. They were fought for, earned through showing up when it was hard, through staying. When you wanted to run, through choosing love even when fear screamed louder. An hour later, a nurse came to get them. "He's stable," she said with a warm smile. "You can meet him now." They wheeled Asha down the hall in her bed, Adrian walking beside her, and when they reached the NICU, Adrian's breath caught. Rows of incubators lined the room, each one holding a tiny baby fighting their own battle. And there, in the third one on the left, was his son. He was hooked up to monitors and tubes, his chest rising and falling under a heat lamp. But his little hand was curled into a fist, his face peaceful, and when Adrian pressed his hand against the incubator's glass, he swore the baby's fingers twitched. "Can I hold him?" Asha asked, her voice breaking. The nurse hesitated. "Not yet. He needs to stabilize a bit more. But you can touch him, talk to him, let him know you're here." So they did. Asha reached through the incubator's opening and gently stroked her son's arm, whispering words of love and promises of tomorrow. And Adrian stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other resting, against the glass, watching the tiny miracle they'd created together. "What should we name him?" Asha asked, her eyes never leaving the baby. Adrian thought for a moment, thought about the fight this little boy had already endured, about the strength it took just to be here. "How about Noah?" He said, "It means rest, peace. After everything he's been through, he deserves some peace." Asha smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Noah," she repeated. "Noah Mercer. I love it." And there, in the soft glow of the NICU, with their son sleeping peacefully between them, Adrian made a silent vow. He would be there. For every midnight feeding, every doctor's appointment, every milestone and every struggle, He would show up, not just physically but emotionally, the way he should have from the beginning. Because this wasn't just about making up for the past. It was about building a future where Noah grew up knowing his father's love, where Usher never had to face anything, alone again, where the mistakes of yesterday didn't define the family they could become. But even in that moment of hope, a question lingered in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. They had a son now. They had this fragile, beautiful connection, but could they rebuild what had been broken? Could love that had shattered so completely ever be whole again? Or were they destined to be forever bound by Noah, but forever separated by the words that could never be unsaid? The monitors beeped steadily. Noah slept on, and Adrian stood there, caught between the miracle of what had just happened and the uncertainty of what came next, wondering if second chances were real, or if some doors, once slammed shut, could never truly be opened again. The NICU became Adrian's world for the next 72 hours. He barely left, barely slept, barely ate anything that didn't come from a vending machine or a sympathetic nurse who took pity on the disheveled man who'd set up camp in the plastic chair beside incubator number 3. Noah, their son, their tiny fighter, was stable, but stable in a NICU at 28 weeks doesn't mean safe. It means alive. It means breathing. It means every day is a victory you don't take for granted because tomorrow could steal it away. Adrian learned things during those 3 days that no business school had ever taught him. He learned that a baby's oxygen saturation level should stay above 95%, and that, when it dips below 90, your heart stops until the nurses adjust the settings and the numbers climb back up. He learned that bradycardia, when a premature baby's heart rate suddenly drops, is common but terrifying. Every single time. He learned that kangaroo care, skin-to-skin contact, could regulate a preemie's temperature and heart rate better than any machine. And he learned that love doesn't wait for perfect timing. It shows up messy and scared and completely unprepared, and it chooses to stay anyway. Asha recovered from the surgery faster than the doctors expected, which didn't surprise Adrian at all. She was strong. She'd always been strong. By the second day, she was up and walking, slowly, painfully, but determinedly making her way to the NICU, every few hours to sit beside Noah's incubator and whisper stories about the world waiting for him. Adrian watched her during those moments, watched the way she'd rest her hand inside the incubator, her finger wrapped in Noah's impossibly tiny grip, and he'd feel something shift inside him. Not just love. He'd always loved her, even when he'd walked away, but reverence. This woman had carried their son through 7 months of loneliness and fear. She'd endured his accusations, his abandonment, his cowardice, and still, when their son's life hung in the balance, she'd called him. She'd given him a chance he didn't deserve. The question that haunted him now wasn't whether he loved her. It was whether love was enough. Could love erase 7 months of silence? Could it rebuild trust that had been shattered so completely? Or were they simply two people bound together by a beautiful child, forever connected but never truly whole? On the third night, when Noah's monitors were steady and Asha had finally gone back to her room to rest, Adrian found himself alone in the NICU's dimly lit waiting room. It was late, past midnight, and the hospital had that particular stillness that comes when the world outside is asleep but inside, life and death wage their quiet wars. He pulled out his phone, scrolling mindlessly through messages he hadn't answered, emails he'd ignored, a life he'd put on pause the moment Asha's call came through. There was a text from his assistant asking about meetings he'd missed, a voicemail from his CFO about quarterly projections, notifications from a world that had kept spinning without him. 3 days ago, those things had mattered. They'd been the center of his universe, the measures by which he defined success. Now they felt hollow, meaningless. What did quarterly projections matter when your son was fighting for every breath? What did any of it matter if you had no one to share it with? He thought about his own father then, a man who'd built an empire but had been absent. For every little league game, every school play, every moment that mattered. Adrian had sworn he'd be different. And then, at the first sign of fear, he'd become exactly the same. But maybe, just maybe, It wasn't too late to change that story. The door to the waiting room opened and a woman walked in, older, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and a weary smile. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee and held one out to him. "You look like you could use this," she said. Adrian blinked, surprised. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. "But you didn't have to." "My grandson's in Bay 7, she explained, settling into a chair across from him. 6 weeks early. 3rd night here. You learn pretty quickly that coffee and kindness are the only currencies that matter in this place." Adrian smiled despite himself. "Which one's yours?" she asked, nodding toward the NICU entrance. "Bay 3, Noah. He's 28 weeks. She let out a low whistle. "A fighter, then?" "Yeah," Adrian said, his throat tight. "He is." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 strangers bound by the universal fear of loving something so small and fragile. Then she spoke again, her voice gentle. "First baby." Adrian nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "You've got the look," she said with a knowing smile. "Equal parts terror and wonder. It's a good look. Means you care." "I almost wasn't here," Adrian admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "I messed up. Bad. And I almost missed all of this." The woman studied him for a long moment. "But you're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters. Not what you did before. Not what you might have done. You're here now. And that little boy in there, he'll remember that. Maybe not consciously, but in the way it matters. In his bones. In his heart. He'll know his father showed up." Adrian felt something break open in his chest. "I don't know if his mother will forgive me," he said quietly. "I don't know if I even deserve it." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lived enough life to know what she was talking about. "It's about choosing. She'll either choose to forgive you or she won't. But here's the thing about people who've been hurt. They're not looking for perfect. They're looking for proof. Proof that you've changed. Proof that you'll stay. Proof that when things get hard again, you won't run." She stood up, patting his shoulder. "Give her that proof, every single day. And maybe you'll find that forgiveness isn't something you earn all at once. It's something you earn in moments, in showing up, in doing the work." She left, disappearing back into the NICU, and Adrian sat there holding his coffee, letting her words sink in. Proof. That's what Asher needed. Not apologies, not grand gestures, just consistent, daily proof that he was different, that he'd stay, that he'd become the man Noah and Asher both deserved. The question was, could he be that man? Could he unlearn a lifetime of running, of choosing work over relationship, of protecting himself instead of protecting the people he loved? Or would he fail them again when the next crisis hit, when the next wave of fear crashed over him? Morning came slowly, painting the waiting room in shades of grey and gold. Adrian must have dozed off at some point because he woke to the sound of footsteps and opened his eyes to find Asher standing in the doorway. She was in a hospital gown and robe, her hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes, but she'd never looked more beautiful. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, standing quickly, wincing at the stiffness in his back. "You should be resting." "I couldn't sleep," she said, moving carefully to sit down. Kept thinking about him, about us, about what happens next. There it was, the conversation they'd been avoiding, dancing around for 3 days while focusing on Noah. What happens next? Adrian sat down beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Adrian finally said. "I know what I did. I know what I put you through. And I know that saying I'm sorry 1,000 times won't erase that." Asher stared at her hands. "No," she agreed. "It won't. But I want you to know that I'm not the same person I was 7 months ago," he continued. "These past 3 days, watching Noah fight, watching you be so strong, it's changed me. Or maybe it's revealed who I should have been all along. I don't know. But I do know this. I want to be here. Not just for Noah, but for you. For us. If you'll let me." Asher looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you know what scared me most when I called you?" she asked. "I was terrified you wouldn't come, terrified that I'd be bringing our son into the world completely alone. But you know what scared me even more?" She paused, her voice trembling. "That you would come, that you'd show up out of obligation or guilt, and that I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if you actually wanted to be here or if you just felt trapped." The words hit Adrian like a punch. "I'm not here out of obligation," he said, his voice fierce. "I'm here because the moment I heard your voice on that phone, I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Walking away from you was the biggest mistake of my life. And I know I can't fix. 7 months in 3 days. I know I have to earn your trust back. But Asha, I want this. I want you. I want our family. Not because I have to, but because I can't imagine my life without it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "I want to believe this is real and not just the emotion of the moment. But Adrian, you broke my heart. You accused me of something unforgivable, and I don't know how to trust you again." "Then don't," Adrian said, and she looked at him in surprise. "Don't trust me yet. Make me earn it. Every day, every decision, every moment. Let me prove to you that I've changed. Let me show you that I'm not going anywhere. And if I fail, if I mess up again, then you'll know. But at least give me the chance to try." Asha wiped her eyes, studying him for a long moment. And then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but I need you to understand something. This isn't about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. This is about the small things, the midnight feedings, the doctor's appointments, the moments when it's hard and exhausting and not Instagram-worthy. That's where I'll see who you really are." "I understand," Adrian said, "and I'll be there. For all of it." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll see," she said, and in those 2 words, Adrian heard both a challenge and a gift. A challenge to prove himself, and a gift of possibility, because "we'll see" meant she was willing to watch. She was willing to give him the chance. And that was more than he deserved. They sat there together, hands intertwined, as the sun rose fully over Manhattan, casting golden light through the waiting room windows. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation with swelling music and passionate kisses. It was something better. It was real. It was 2 broken people choosing to try, choosing to show up for their son and maybe, just maybe, for each other. But the question that lingered, the one neither of them could answer yet, was whether trying would be enough, whether love, even fierce and determined love, could bridge the canyon that betrayal had carved between them. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Adrian rented a hotel room near the hospital but rarely used it. Most nights he slept in the NICU waiting room, catching fragments of rest between Noah's feeding times. Asha was discharged after 5 days, but she didn't go far. She found a nearby Ronald McDonald House, a place for families of hospitalized children, and set up a temporary home there. They saw each other constantly, in the NICU, in the cafeteria, in the quiet moments at 3 a.m., when they were both too wired to sleep, and slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild. Not a relationship, not yet, but a partnership, a team united by their son's needs. Adrian learned to change diapers the size of his palm. He learned to feed Noah through a feeding tube, measuring tiny amounts of breast milk with precision. He learned the names of all the nurses, learned which doctors were optimistic, and which ones spoke in careful, measured tones that meant concern. He called his assistant and told her to clear his calendar indefinitely. He ignored emails from the board, voicemails from investors, the entire empire he'd built demanding his attention. Let it wait. Let it all wait. Because for the first time in his life, Adrian understood what actually mattered. And Asha watched. She watched him show up every day. Watched him ask questions, take notes, remember things the doctors said. Watched him hold Noah during kangaroo care, this powerful CEO sitting shirtless in a NICU chair with his tiny son asleep on his chest, tears streaming down his face. She watched, and slowly, the wall around her heart began to crack. 2 weeks into Noah's NICU stay, they hit a milestone. The doctors said Noah could try breastfeeding. He'd been bottle-fed through a tube until now, but he was gaining strength, gaining weight, showing signs that he was ready for the next step. Asha was nervous. Adrian could see it in the way she fidgeted with her bracelet, the way she bit her lip as the nurse explained the process. "What if he can't do it?" she whispered to Adrian. "What if I can't do it?" "Then we'll figure it out," Adrian said simply. "Together." And when Noah latched on for the first time, when Asha felt that pull and connection, when her eyes filled with tears of joy and relief, Adrian was there. He photographed the moment on his phone, not for social media, not for anyone else, just so they'd remember. So Noah would one day see proof of his mother's strength, of his own determination, of the moment he took another step toward home. "He's doing it," Asha breathed, laughing through her tears. "Adrian, he's doing it." And Adrian, standing beside her with his hand on her shoulder, felt something he hadn't felt in 7 months. Hope. Not hope that things would go back to the way they were. That was impossible, and maybe even undesirable. But hope that they could build something new, something stronger, something forged in the fire of their mistakes and Noah's fight. 3 weeks in, the doctors gave them news that made Asha sob and Adrian's knees go weak. "He can go home," Dr. Patel said, smiling. "He's hit all his benchmarks. He's feeding well, maintaining his temperature, no more bradycardia episodes. This little guy is ready. Home." The word hung in the air between Adrian and Asha, like a question neither of them had dared to ask. Because whose home? Asha's apartment in Harlem, where she'd spent 7 months preparing a nursery alone? Adrian's penthouse, where everything was sterile and expensive and utterly wrong for a baby. They hadn't talked about logistics, hadn't talked about custody or living arrangements or any of the practical realities that came with co-parenting when you weren't together. They'd been so focused on survival, on getting Noah strong enough to leave the hospital, that they'd avoided thinking about what came after. Now, after was here, and they had to face it. They sat in the NICU's family consultation room, Noah sleeping peacefully in his car seat between them. A car seat they'd had to buy that morning because neither of them had been prepared for discharge to come so soon. "I've been thinking," Asha started, her voice careful, "about what happens now." Adrian nodded, his stomach tight. "Me too. I have the nursery set up at my place," she continued, "and my mom's been asking to come stay for a few weeks, help with the night feedings. But I also know you want to be involved, and I don't want to keep him from you. So maybe we could work out a schedule. You could come over during the day or take him on weekends once he's a bit older, or—" "Move in with me," Adrian interrupted. Asha stopped mid-sentence, staring at him. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated, the words coming faster now, fueled by a certainty he'd only just discovered. "Both of you. I have plenty of space. We could set up the nursery in the room next to mine. Your mom could stay too if she wants. There's a guest suite. And before you say no, just hear me out." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I know you don't trust me yet. I know we're not together, not in the way we were. But Asha, I don't want to be a weekend dad. I don't want to miss the midnight feedings or the first laugh or any of it because we're living in separate places, trying to coordinate schedules. I want to be there every day, every night. And I think—" he paused, swallowing hard. "I think maybe you want that too. Not for us, necessarily, but for Noah." Asha's eyes were wide, her expression unreadable. "Adrian, that's crazy," he offered. "Maybe, but is it any crazier than what we've already been through? These past 3 weeks, we've been a team. We've made decisions together, supported each other, taken care of our son together. Why can't we keep doing that? Because living together is different," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It's one thing to show up at a hospital. It's another thing to share a space, to navigate each other's habits and boundaries and—" She stopped, shaking her head. "What if it doesn't work? What if we end up hating each other, and then Noah's caught in the middle? And what if it does work?" Adrian countered. "What if this is exactly what we need? Not to jump back into a relationship, but to build something new, something based on who we are now, not who we were before." Asha looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening above him. "I don't know," she whispered. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," Adrian said, though his heart was pounding. "But Asha, whatever you decide, I'm going to be there. If you want to live separately, fine. I'll be at your place every morning and every night. I'll sleep on your couch if I have to. But I'm not missing this. I'm not missing him. Or you." Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, fear, longing, all tangled together. "Okay," she finally said. "Let me think about it." And that was enough. For now, that was enough. They took Noah home that afternoon, to Asha's apartment for the moment, until decisions were made. Adrian carried the car seat while Asha juggled the discharge papers and a bag of supplies. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with photos and plants and the smell of something that was distinctly her. The nursery was painted a soft yellow, with a crib in the corner and a rocking chair by the window. Adrian stood in the doorway, taking it all in, and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it stole his breath. She'd done all this alone. Painted the walls, assembled the furniture, chosen the colors and curtains and stuffed animals. She'd built a home for their son while he'd been absent, and now he was asking to be part of it. "It's perfect," he said quietly. Asha glanced at him, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so." He set the car seat down gently and turned to her. "Asha, I know I have no right to ask this, but can I stay, just for tonight? I'll sleep on the couch. I want to be here for his first night home." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Logic versus emotion. Fear versus hope. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but just tonight. Tomorrow we figure out a real plan." "Deal," Adrian said, relief flooding through him. That night was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting, terrifying chaos. Noah woke every 2 hours, crying with a force that seemed impossible for something so small. Asha fed him while Adrian changed diapers and walked laps around the apartment, bouncing their son gently while murmuring nonsense that somehow seemed to help. At 4 a.m., when Noah finally fell asleep and Asha collapsed on the couch in exhaustion, Adrian sat beside her. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said. She laughed, a tired, delirious sound. "I'm a mess." "You're both," he said with a smile. "But mostly amazing." She leaned her head on his shoulder, just for a moment, and Adrian felt his heart stutter. It was such a small gesture, so casual, but it felt monumental. Like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to trust him again. "Adrian," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "Yeah? You can stay, not just tonight. You can stay," and there it was. Not a declaration of love, not a promise of forever, just an invitation to be present, to be part of the mess and the beauty, and the exhausting, incredible journey of raising their son together. "Thank you," he whispered, but she was already asleep. The weeks that followed were an exercise in navigation. Adrian moved his essentials into Asha's guest room: clothes, laptop, the parts of his life that fit in a suitcase. He kept his penthouse, but rarely went there. Everything that mattered was here, in this small apartment in Harlem, with the woman he loved and the son he was learning to know. They developed a rhythm. Asha handled the daytime feedings while Adrian took the nights, stumbling, bleary-eyed to the nursery at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., at 6 a.m. They cooked together, or rather, Asha cooked while Adrian chopped vegetables, and provided unhelpful commentary that made her laugh despite herself. They argued about small things, whether the apartment was too warm, whether Noah's cry meant hungry or tired, whether the Yankees or the Mets were the superior team, and in those arguments, Adrian saw healing. Because you don't argue with someone you don't trust. You don't laugh with someone you can't forgive. And slowly, carefully, Asha was doing both. One night, about 6 weeks after Noah came home, Adrian found Asha standing in the nursery doorway, watching their son sleep. "Hey," he said softly, coming up beside her. "You okay?" "I was just thinking," she said, not taking her eyes off Noah, "about how different this is from what I imagined." "Different how?" "I always pictured doing this with someone," she said. The whole cliché, married, stable, prepared. And then when you left, I pictured doing it alone. But this, she gestured between them, this in-between space we're in, I never imagined this. Is it okay? Adrian asked, his heart in his throat. That we're in this space? She turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen in months. Softness, openness, maybe even affection. It's better than okay, she said. It's real. That night, after Noah was asleep and the apartment was quiet, they sat together on the couch with cups of tea, not watching TV, not scrolling through phones, just sitting, being present. I forgive you, Asha said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Adrian's breath caught. What? I forgive you, she repeated, turning to face him fully, for what you said, for leaving, for not being there. I've been holding on to it because I thought if I let go, if I forgave you, it would mean what you did was okay. But it's not about that. It's about me. I'm tired of carrying that hurt. I'm tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop, so I'm choosing to forgive you. Not because you've earned it, though you have these past 2 months, but because I want to move forward. Adrian felt tears burn his eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Asha said, reaching out to take his hand. Just keep showing up. Keep being the man you've been these past 2 months. That's all I need. I will, Adrian promised, his voice rough. Every day. For the rest of my life. She smiled, that beautiful smile he'd fallen in love with 2 years ago at a charity gala. One day at a time, Adrian. One day at a time. And she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss of their early romance. It was softer, tentative, the kiss of 2 people who'd been broken and were learning to be whole again. When they pulled apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I never stopped. I know, she said. I love you too, even when I didn't want to. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Adrian stood on the terrace of his Manhattan penthouse, the same terrace where he'd stood 7 months earlier, alone and empty. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Asha was inside, Noah asleep in her arms, and they were here because Adrian had asked them to come. He told her he had something to show her, though the truth was much bigger than that. She stepped out onto the terrace, Noah bundled against the cool air, and looked around in confusion. What are we doing here? Adrian took a breath, his heart pounding. I wanted you to see something. He gestured to the city spread out before them, millions of lights twinkling against the darkness. 7 months ago, I stood here and felt completely alone. I had all this. He swept his hand toward the skyline, toward the penthouse, toward the empire he'd built. And I had nothing. Because I didn't have you. I didn't have him. He turned to face her fully. You were right. This place is wrong for a baby. It's cold and sterile, and nothing about it feels like home. But you know what I realized? Home isn't a place. It's people. It's you and Noah. And I don't need this penthouse or the view or any of it. I just need you. Asha's eyes were shining. Adrian, what are you saying? I'm saying let's find a new place, he said. Together. Something that's ours, not mine or yours. Somewhere in between your Harlem roots and my Manhattan skyscrapers. Somewhere that feels like family. You mean that? She asked, her voice trembling. Every word. She stepped closer, Noah stirring in her arms, and kissed him. And this time, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't careful. It was the kiss of 2 people who'd found their way back to each other through fire, and fear, and the stubborn belief that love, real love, was worth fighting for. 6 months later, in a brownstone in Brooklyn, with a view of the park and enough space for a growing family, Adrian. Mercer stood in the nursery watching his son, now 10 months old, healthy and thriving, play with blocks on the floor. Asha came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. What are you thinking about? She asked. How lucky I am, Adrian said simply. How close I came to missing all of this. But you didn't miss it, she reminded him. You showed up. I almost didn't, he admitted. When you called that day, There was a part of me that wanted to ignore it, that wanted to run. But something stopped me. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was just fear of regret. I don't know. But I answered, and it changed everything. Well, I'm glad you did, Asha said, resting her head against his back. Because I can't imagine doing this without you. Noah looked up at them and laughed. That pure, joyful sound that only babies can make. And Adrian felt something settle in his chest. Peace. Purpose. A sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. They'd fought. They'd cried. They'd had nights where the exhaustion felt overwhelming, and mornings where they questioned if they could keep going. But they had kept going. Together. And somewhere along the way, they'd built something new. Not the relationship they'd had before, but something stronger, something real, something worth every moment of pain it took to get here. As the sun set over Brooklyn, casting golden light through the nursery window, Adrian made a silent promise. To Noah, to Asha, to himself. He would never stop showing up, never stop choosing them, never stop proving that love, when fought for, when earned through daily acts of presence and commitment, could heal even the deepest wounds. So, here's what I want to know. Have you ever had a moment where you almost lost something precious, where your own fear or pride or mistakes nearly cost you everything that mattered? Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a chance to be there for someone who needed you. What did you do? Did you run like Adrian almost did? Or did you show up? Because here's the truth that Adrian learned in that hospital room, in those sleepless nights, in the slow rebuilding of trust. Second chances aren't given. They're earned, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of showing up when it would be easier to walk away. And the question isn't whether you'll mess up. You will. We all do. The question is what you do after. Do you stay in the mess? Do you fight for what matters? Do you choose love even when fear is screaming louder? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. Have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve? Have you ever given someone one? What did it teach you about forgiveness, about love, about who you want to be? And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of someone in your life who showed up when it mattered, or someone you wish had, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're diving deep into real stories about real people facing real struggles every single week. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's fighting for a second chance, someone who's deciding whether to forgive, someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to show up. Because at the end of the day, that's what Adrian and Asha's story teaches us. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about choosing every single day to fight for the people you love, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you don't know if it'll work out. So what's your next step? Who do you need to show up for? What second chance are you waiting to take? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.